The crystal chandeliers shimmered like captured stars inside the grand dining hall of the Royal Meridian Hotel, casting a golden glow across tables dressed in white linen and silver cutlery. Laughter polished and hollow floated through the air, laughter of people who had everything and yet found joy in mocking those who had nothing. At the center of it all sat Victor Harrington, a man whose wealth was the talk of the city, his arrogance the size of the empire he built. Beside him sat a royal investor from Dubai, his calm demeanor contrasting Victor's loud and theatrical presence. And then, standing before them, trembling slightly as she held a basket of red and white roses, was a young waitress named Miam. Victor pointed at her, grinning widely, his voice echoing through the restaurant. "Sell me these roses in Arabic, and I'll pay you $100,000. The laughter that followed was sharp, like glass breaking in the air. Miam's heart pounded. Her hands tightened around the handle of the basket. For her, those roses weren't just flowers. They were part of a small favor she did for the restaurant's owner. A side task to earn an extra tip to send home to her family in Syria. She had come to America 3 years ago after losing almost everything, her home, her father, her future to war. And now she stood before a man who found her accent amusing enough to turn into a game. If you believe kindness and second chances can change lives, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Kindness Corner, and share this story with someone who still believes in humanity. The moment hung between them like a challenge and a cruelty. Miam's throat went dry. She could have walked away. She could have ignored the mockery. But as she looked into the man's laughing eyes, something inside her refused to shrink. She straightened her back and took a deep breath. The clinking of glasses faded, the chatter dimmed, and even the royal investor beside Victor turned to watch. Miam began to speak. Her voice soft yet sure carried words that rolled like poetry. Ashtari hadihi Allah by haben wamal lihat atodith alansan kabel aklahai. The words flowed in perfect Arabic, elegant and musical. By these roses with love and hope, she translated quietly because they speak to the heart before they reach the mind. The room fell silent. Victor's grin faded. The man beside him, Sheikh Rashid, leaned forward, eyes wide with respect. He understood every word, every delicate syllable that carried both pain and grace. The roses trembled in Miam's hands, not because she was afraid now, but because the weight of her story lived within those words. When she finished, there was a stillness so deep that even the chandeliers seemed to stop swaying. Victor, once mocking, now sat frozen, his laughter swallowed by awe. It wasn't just her fluency that stunned him. It was the tone, the dignity, the pain that wrapped itself around her every word. He had expected broken English, awkward attempts, maybe embarrassment. But instead, he had been handed a lesson in humility by a girl who refused to be small. Sheikh Rashid broke the silence first, standing slowly and placing a hand over his chest in the Arabic gesture of respect. "Your words," he said softly, "cry the soul of a poet." Victor's throat tightened as he looked at her. He didn't speak. He simply reached for his wallet, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled something down. Then, without saying a word, he handed her the check. When she glanced at it, her eyes widened. 1100. Her lips parted, unsure whether to refuse or cry. Victor stood abruptly, his face pale. He muttered something to himself and walked out, his laughter replaced by silence, his arrogance left behind on the polished floor. As the doors closed behind him, Miam stood there, still holding the roses, tears welling in her eyes. Sheikh Rashid gestured for her to sit, but she shook her head. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "But I cannot accept this. It was never about the money." The sheikh smiled faintly. "Then use it," he said. "Not for yourself, but for others who have lost their voice like you once did." That night, Miam walked out of the Royal Meridian, clutching the check against her heart, her reflection passing through the glass doors like a ghost leaving behind its pain. The cool wind met her face, carrying with it the faint fragrance of roses. She stopped at a park bench nearby and sat down, the city lights reflecting in her tears. Memories came flooding back. The sound of explosions, her father's arms shielding her as their home crumbled, her mother whispering prayers through the nights of hunger. She had come so far from the dust and despair. And yet, it took one cruel joke to remind her how fragile her dignity had once felt. But something inside her had changed. The roses she held were no longer just flowers. They were symbols of her strength, her resilience, and her refusal to be broken by cruelty disguised as laughter. She decided then that she would turn this moment into something beautiful. Over the next months, Miem used part of that money to start a small community center for refugee women, offering free language lessons, job guidance, and emotional support. She called it the Garden of Hope, and on the walls she painted her favorite Arabic verse, "From every thorn blooms a flower." Years later, that very millionaire, Victor Harrington, would visit her again. His company had been collaborating with the very charity she founded. When he entered the small center, he recognized her instantly. But she was different now, confident, graceful, surrounded by women whose laughter carried warmth, not mockery. He stood silently at the doorway, his eyes wet, and when she turned to see him, he simply said, "You changed me." Miem smiled softly, her voice calm and steady. "No, Mr. Harrington," she said. "You changed yourself the moment you decided to listen instead of laugh." The two stood in that quiet hall, surrounded by women learning to speak new words in new tongues, their futures unfolding like petals in sunlight. What began as mockery ended as redemption. One arrogant challenge had become the spark for dozens of reborn lives. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your small act of kindness helps us share more true and inspiring stories that remind the world to listen before judging. Before we end, tell us in the comments, what do you think Miem's story teaches about dignity and kindness? And as the screen fades to soft piano music, the final image lingers. A young woman standing in her garden surrounded by blooming roses, whispering to the wind. Every word has power. Every kindness has wings.